Blog post 103. Date, October 5th. Followers, 62,977. I hate it. I hate them. I hate the fact they're together, and I hate that I don't know what they're doing. Just thinking about the pair of them sets me on edge. Kalina marched into the bedroom a few moments after my mother had drawn blood from Noah. "All done, Angela, darling," she said, cocking her head to the side. My mum's gaze flitted to me before she audibly swallowed. "I know there's so much to talk about," Kalina continued, feigning ignorance of the awkwardness in the situation. "Although we really should get going now. Important science business to do. Right, Angela?" She hooked her arm through my mother's like they were old friends, practically skipping as she guided her down the stairs. "I've organised everything. The university medical department is letting us have one of their labs on short-term loan. I just hope it's up to your standard. If not, let me know. I'm very efficient when it comes to resolving issues." Mum turned and looked at me again as she was half dragged out of the house, looking suitably terrified by this new best buddy act. I didn't feel any sympathy. She had made her bed. She could lie in it. "We'll be in touch if we need you," Kalina chirped, waving a hand. "Don't get into any more trouble while we're away." A second later, they were gone, and we were left standing there.
"Do you think one of us should have gone with them?"
Glen said, the first to find his voice since their sudden exit.
"You know, monitor what they're doing?"
I didn't want to say it, but even his superior intellect probably wasn't going to be of any help to Mum. Besides, she always preferred working on her own. "From now on, I don't want either of you alone with Kalina," I said, changing the subject. "Do you understand? She's dangerous." Finn and Glen exchanged a puzzled look, almost a mirror image of one another.
"We've both been alone with her before, Rin. A lot," Glen said. "And I was married to her. Possibly," Finn added.
"That was then," I insisted, "when she had something to lose by exposing who she was. Her whole point of being alone with you was to collect information on me. I need you to promise, from this point on, no one is on their own with her. Do you understand me?"
"Except Mum."
"She brought that on herself. Can we all agree on this, please? Because I swear I will go full vamp on you guys if you disregard me." Finn looked at Glen, clearly wondering if I was joking or not.
"I wouldn't try it. She broke my arm once for beating her at Monopoly."
"I did not break your arm. It was a compound fracture. And it was not because you beat me. It was because you were cheating." Finn chuckled, and Glen grinned in response, and for the briefest of moments, things felt almost normal, like we'd slipped back a decade. But it didn't last.
"So what happens now?" Glen asked. "Will she come back, or will she call us if she finds something?"
"I don't know," I said. "I guess we just have to wait and see." Blog post 104. Date, October 6th. Followers, 63,065. There's so much I should have done today. Gone to lectures to start with, and I've got reading to do, essays to write, and my next tutorial to get ready for. Not that I expect Finn to hold a lack of preparation against me, given the circumstances. I've barely left Noah's side. I just can't bear the thought of not being able to keep an eye on him, which pretty much excludes doing anything else. I keep worrying that maybe Kalina isn't done with her tricks. Glen came into my room about half an hour ago, before he left for his lectures, looking almost as shit as I feel. But the heel of his hand was marked with ink, so I guess he'd been studying last night, which is good.
He's still okay,
he said, nodding towards Noah. I guess. Okay felt like the wrong word, but he was still with us, still breathing, which I know was what Glen meant. His pulse is so low, though. It's not natural. I don't know how long he'll be able to stay like this. I left the rest of my thoughts unspoken.
You know, he might suddenly come out of it, like I did. It's just taking a bit longer, that's all. I was thinking, I wouldn't put it past Galena to make stuff up, just to panic you.
I nodded, having no insight to offer. I thought Glen was about to leave, but instead he straightened his back slightly. A small movement, I know, but you have to remember how much time we've spent together. I knew this gesture meant he wanted to say something. Something important. What is it?
It's nothing. Not really, he replied. Only it crossed my mind. While Mum's here, you should ask her to donate.
I don't want anything from that woman.
I get it. I completely understand. But you're already getting help from her with Noah. And you need the blood. I know it's not something you probably want to think about at the moment, but you're down a second donor now. I don't mind driving up to Lavisa's and getting some from her this weekend, but that seems like an awful lot of effort when Mum's already here.
He paused, and I knew what he was going to say next.
Or you could always ask Finn, now that he knows.
Finn's got more than enough on his plate. He doesn't need that on top of everything else.
Just think about it.
Glen hesitated. There was clearly more he wanted to say.
Just try to stay positive, he said, obviously bottling it up. Try.
Just like that first night. All I want to do is curl up with Noah and be as close to him as possible. Because the longer he's like this, the harder it's getting. I feel like I'm slipping, sliding back to a previous time when grief was overwhelming me, when the pain in my soul far outweighed any physical suffering I could ever imagine. I needed to do something, some way of occupying myself. So I used the time to email my lecturers to say I'd be absent for a few days due to a bad flare-up of my photosensitivity and would hopefully return next week. Hopefully. I'd only just finished sending them when the front door opened. "Did you forget something?" I called, heading into the hallway and expecting to see Glen. Only it wasn't him standing there. It was my two least favourite people in the world, Kalina and my mother. "You have to be fucking joking." "I hope you don't mind. I got myself a key cut," Kalina said. While I'd been crying myself raw, hugging Noah during the night, Kalina appeared to have been getting herself a manicure and a blow-dry. She was dressed entirely in cream with massive gold hoop earrings, and her hair fell in soft waves. She could have been a model in a bloody beauty commercial. "I do mind, actually," I said, marching towards her and snatching the key out of her hand. "And there was me thinking I was being helpful," she pouted. Behind her, my mother looked shamefaced. "Have you found a way to wake him up?" I asked. She pressed her lips tightly together before she spoke. "As this state of suspended animation was caused by a reaction to venom, it's likely we can bring him out of it with an injection of something similar to adrenaline. A bit like when you use an EpiPen." "Well, let's do that then," I said. But my mother shook her head.
"It isn't as simple as that, I'm afraid. With his body essentially shut down, he isn't able to process the venom that's in his system.
So the likely outcome, if we wake him up, is that he'll go straight back into the catatonic state.
So what does that mean? I said, my patience running thin.
It means it's going to take time, Merrewyn. I need to create an antivenom that will neutralise both yours and Kalina's.
How much time? Kalina came over and rested her hand on my shoulder. Her icy touch sent a shiver spider walking down my spine.
Look, sweetie, I appreciate what you're trying to do. He's cute, and he wasn't bad in bed when I was with him either, so I totally get everything you said about the toes and things. But honestly, maybe we just chalk this one up to bad luck. At least you can have a good fill before he goes, so it won't be a complete waste.
I am a lover, not a hater. I've said that on here before. But I detest that woman. She has 0 redeeming features. And if anyone dares to say that she was just trying to prepare me for the worst, don't waste your breath. I know what I said in my old blog about vampires still having a soul. But if Kalina ever had one, then it dried up a long, long time ago. Get out of my house. Now, I snarled, showing her my fangs, which only seemed to amuse her.
Wow, you are still so emotional. Interesting. Actually, I was heading off anyway. I've got some lecturers to bribe. She turned and offered a short wave. Toodaloo, she said.
Obviously, sensing that this wasn't the time for peace talks, my mother hurried away after her. Well, they can stay together for all I care. They deserve each other. Next time, just call me, I yelled.
Blog post 105. Date, October the 8th. Followers, 63,291. The waiting is sheer agony. The inability to do anything other than sit idly by, totally powerless as Noah's vital signs continue to slip, is killing me. Finn has been around, and we discussed again taking him to hospital so that they can at least put him on life support or something. But we both know Kalina's threats aren't idle ones. She'd happily slaughter Noah, Finn and Glen if we involve anyone else. Mum messaged me, apparently thinking a phone call might be badly received, and told me they're making progress in the lab. But I don't know what that means. Could they have a cure ready in a couple of hours or a couple of months? There's no point me asking. She'll be evasive, just like always. This really is torture. Blog post 106. Date, October 9th. Followers, 63,504. Mum came over this morning, about half an hour after Glen left for lectures. I hate being alone in the house with Noah when he's in this state. When Glen left the house yesterday briefly, Finn was here, and even though we didn't talk much, it helped. But it's just me now. Noah and me. At one point, I found the quiet so overwhelming I almost called Finn to ask him to come back and stay with me. But I didn't. So I guess you could say I was almost glad when Mum showed up. But that would probably be an exaggeration. "May I come in?" she asked when I opened the front door to her. She didn't look any better than the day before and clearly hadn't slept much over the weekend either. The late nights had left her eyes bloodshot and with an extra set of crow's feet. "Have you found anything?" I said. She swallowed, visibly and audibly. I hadn't put any sunscreen on and shards of sunlight were breaking through the clouds. The last thing I wanted to add was sunburn to a list of shitty things that were going on in my life. so I turned and walked to the kitchen, leaving her to follow me. "Merrewyn, tell me about Noah," I interrupted before she could start trying to wheedle her way back into my life. "Have you managed to develop an antivenom yet?" "It's not that simple. We have to allow the rats we've injected to build up antibodies." "I don't care about the science, Mother. I just want an answer." "I need more time. Please, Merrewyn, we have lots to talk about." I spun around, anticipating what was about to come and ready to nip it in the bud. "That's where you're wrong. We have nothing to talk about. You did what you did. Nothing can change that. I have nothing to say to you on the matter. And quite frankly, I don't believe a single thing that comes out of your mouth." She dipped her chin and stared at the tiled floor. "Kalina was my only option to save you," she said. "Did you not hear me? I said I don't want to know. All I want to hear from you is how close you are to curing Noah." My mother's appearance may have changed substantially, but her stubbornness remained just as strong. She opened her mouth to object again. Thankfully, the doorbell interrupted her. For a split second, I thought Kalina had returned, but a single sniff told me otherwise. I pushed past her and opened the door to Finn. "What about your lectures?" I said, with no greeting or niceties. Without waiting for an invitation, he stepped inside, slipped off his coat, and hung it on the hook by the door. "I've already done my first one this morning. I don't have another until 1:30, so I thought I'd come and check how he's doing," he said, almost hopefully. "Nothing's changed, I'm afraid, other than continuing to get weaker," I said. "I don't think he's going to wake up, Finn. Not like Glen did." His disappointment was palpable. "Nothing from your end?" he asked my mother, noticing her in the kitchen doorway. "Not yet," I said, before she could get a word out. "She says she needs time to grow the anti-venom or some shit." "That's not exactly what I said." I cut her off with a glare, and Finn sighed. "So how much longer can he continue to get weaker before he left the question hanging in the air. "Glen says the deterioration's very slow, but he can't stay like this forever." I looked to Mum and she gave a tiny nod of agreement. I could feel Finn's frustration. It was somewhat cramped with the three of us in the hallway, so I moved through to the living room, assuming they would follow, which they did, although no one took a seat. "What now?" Finn asked my mother. And this time I didn't interrupt. After all, I wanted to know the answer as much as he did. "There's nothing we can do for a while. I could really do with a shower, though, and some rest," she said. She pulled nervously on her fingers and looked at me. "I was hoping I might be able to catch a nap on your sofa. I know I said I'd find somewhere, but hotels are expensive and it doesn't seem worth it for just a couple of hours. I spent last night in the lab. To be honest, money is tight. I haven't been working much since your dad passed away." This declaration totally surprised me. I'd expected that she'd thrown herself into whatever job she could find as a distraction. But I remained as stony-faced and impassive as I could. "I'm sure Glen and I can scrape together enough money for a hotel for you," I said. "That won't be necessary," Finn cut in. "I've got a place 5 minutes' walk from here. University accommodation. It's nothing fancy, but it's got a spare bed and a hot shower." It was a generous offer, and one he really didn't have to make, but I was grateful he did. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose," my mother replied. "You won't. I'll be heading straight back to university. This was just a quick drop-in. I've got my first batch of student essays due in today." "Shit," I said, "that's today." He offered me a brief smile. "Don't worry. I'm pretty sure there's an extension available for you on this one." "Thank you," I sighed. I wished he hadn't had to leave so quickly, I wanted to speak to him some more, to tell him how grateful I was, not just for helping out with my mum, but for everything. Not that I'd ever doubted him.
"I'll see you later,"
he said to me, absent-mindedly brushing a strand of hair behind my ear.
"Try to get some rest."
And that was it. Now I'm on my own, yet again, waiting. Blog post 107. Date, October the 11th. Followers, 64,108. So much has happened over the last 48 hours. I need to fill you in, so sorry if there are typos. I'm just trying to get all this down as fast as possible. So here goes. And apologies, it's going to be a long one. Like I said, there's a lot to fit in. While Mum worked at the lab, Finn spent the nights at mine, next to Noah, talking to him, recalling events from their childhood, and occasionally nodding off, only to come to again with a start. Glen carried on normally, or as normal as he could, going to lectures and trying to study in the evening. While I basically tried to get my head around everything that had happened. I couldn't even face coming on here with no news to tell you. I'm sorry, because I'm sure some of you wanted updates, but there simply hadn't been any to report. Each day that passes, each hour in fact, the dread in my gut has grown, and the more I've been sinking into despair. How long did the others last? I asked Kalina yesterday. 6 days since Noah collapsed. How long can humans survive like this? She didn't have a key to let herself in anymore, but she has an uncanny knack of turning up any time I want to have an important discussion with Glen or Finn. I'm convinced she lurks somewhere, listening in, or has placed bugs around the place. She replied with a shrug and a lazy sigh. Well, normally we would have drained them long before this, so that doesn't help us much, does it? It might be a week, a year. You put way too much importance on time, you know. You're immortal now. You shouldn't let it stress you out so much. So, with a time frame of somewhere between a week and a year, I was no better off. But when Mum started hammering on the door this afternoon, yelling my name, all that changed. Merrewyn! Merrewyn! The first thing I picked up on when I let her in was how she looked more like her old self. Some of that old energy and colour had returned to her cheeks, and she was beaming from ear to ear, almost literally. Where's Finn? She said, barging past me. He needs to hear this. I knew, without needing to message Finn, that he was in a lecture, because that's where I should have been too. I rang him all the same, hoping that he'd have his mobile on silent somewhere he could see, so that he'd notice I was calling and wrap it all up quickly. Can't you just tell me now? I said, as the phone continued to ring. And tell Finn as soon as he gets here. It's not just what I need to tell him, it's what I think I can do, Merrewyn. Don't worry, an hour more isn't going to change things. But Finn should definitely be here. She was practically bouncing on her toes, which was making me massively nervous, but at the same time caused a glimmer of hope to return. Can't you just let me know if it's good news? I begged. She paused, pressing her lips together before her cheeks rose into a massive grin. It's definitely good news. Hearing that felt like someone had lifted a 10-ton weight from my chest. I kept ringing Finn on redial, but each time the call went straight to voicemail. Thankfully, 20 minutes later, he was standing outside my front door.
I'm so sorry. I left my phone in the office. Really stupid of me. Has something happened? Has his condition changed?
No, I said, shaking my head. He's the same as he was, but Mum's here and she says she's got good news. At this point, I didn't know exactly how good her good news was, but I couldn't stop myself from being excited. I grabbed Finn's hand, squeezing it tightly as I led him into the living room, where Mum was sitting in the armchair. Our hands were still clasped together as we took a seat opposite her on the sofa. It reminded me of all those appointments I went to as a child after the cancer had struck. The separation between the doctor and my parents and me. But those times had always been tainted with trepidation. News of what treatment would be tried next, how much worse it was likely to get before it got better. But sitting there, with my knee pressed against Finn's, feeling his pulse flowing through me, the excitement was tangible. "Okay, go," I said to Mum. I swear the intake of breath she took must have lasted a good 5 seconds. Longer even. Finally, she started to speak. "As I told you before, I had to produce the antibodies using the rats. That actually took less time than I thought it would, which was a real bonus. It was something to do with having 2 venoms in the system, maybe. Or perhaps it was just because—" "What are you saying, Mum? We don't need the preamble. We just want to know what you found out." She nodded quickly, and her heart rate increased. "The antivenom is ready," she said. "I induced hibernation in 3 similar rats, then injected them with it. And they woke up." Silence followed. I couldn't believe I'd heard her correctly. "Say that again?" I said. "I said, Merrewyn, they woke up. They woke up and started running around." My heart soared. After preparing myself for the worst, here I was getting the best possible news.
"And they're all okay?" Finn asked. "The rats that came out of the hibernation, they're all right?"
"Slightly elevated heart rates," she replied, "but that could easily be because they were running around for the first time in 2 days. Their glucose levels were low, but again, that was likely due to a lack of food. They've also been drinking more than average, but considering their previous state, that's no surprise." I was in complete shock. Her words weren't sinking in, and once again it fell to Finn to ask the question.
"So, what happens now?" he said.
My mother's look of elation was replaced by a serious expression, and butterflies started flying around my stomach at such a pace I thought I was going to vomit. "This is why I need you here, Finn," she said. "To get your permission."
"My permission?"
She reached into her bag and pulled out a small vial of liquid. To be honest, one tube of clear liquid looks basically the same as another to me, but I could tell from the way she was holding it that this one was special. "It's up to you now, what we do next." Now, unless you live under a rock, you'll be aware that a fair amount of time goes into research and development for anything drug-related, not to mention countless trials and reports. You can maybe achieve that in a handful of years when you've got a population of millions to choose guinea pigs from. We had 1 guy and a few rodents. Not to mention my mother had been using a lab sourced through the dodgy dealings of a psychotic vampire.
"What do you think? Is it safe?"
Finn asked my mother, who'd now placed the vial on the arm of her chair, from where it commanded my attention. Her answer, as I could have anticipated, was evasive. "No drug is 100% safe. None. And if I had my way, I'd do a lot more testing before I even considered giving the antivenom to Noah, but—" "But what, Mother?" It felt like she'd let something slip. "All the rats I gave the venom to became catatonic and were dead within 24 hours. The 3 that received the antivenom were the only ones that had survived." She had had ample time to tell me this when we'd spoken previously, so this was somewhat unexpected news. Then again, this was the same woman who turned me into a vampire, so I don't know why I was surprised. "I know you're probably angry I didn't tell you earlier," she said, before I could launch into another tirade, "but there was nothing to gain from you knowing when we couldn't do anything about it." "You still should have said something," I replied. "Possibly." "We had a right to know. He could have died at any moment." The volume of my voice was rising. I suspect I might have completely snapped, but Finn rested his hand on my knee and squeezed it ever so lightly. When I turned to look at him, he stared directly into my eyes as if he had all the answers, and I'd be safe as long as he was there. It had been a long time since that had happened. Mum cleared her throat, and a heat rose to his cheeks as Finn swiftly turned back to her, leaving me with a strange sensation, a bit like butterflies in my stomach.
"You did what you thought was best," he said, rather formally. "So the 3 you gave the anti-venom to, they're all alive and well?"
"Yes, and it's been nearly 12 hours. But I need you to know it's not a definite cure. It's not guaranteed to save him. If you want certainty, there's only one thing you can do, Merrewyn. You have to turn him."
"But then he'd be a vampire,"
Finn said, stating the obvious. "He would." I was so glad that he was there. I'm not sure I could have made the call myself. How doctors and surgeons can make these life-changing decisions on a daily basis is beyond me. "Whatever you decide," I said to Finn, "I'll be okay with it." Silence descended as he pondered this awful choice. Deep down, I knew which way he'd go. He may have handled discovering I was a vampire, but it's not a lifestyle you'd wish on anyone, particularly not after what he went through with Kalina.
"Are the rats properly alive?"
he asked. "Yes, with fully functioning brain stems and organs, just like your average street rat," Mum replied.
"Okay then," Finn said. "Let's do this. Let's get my brother back."
You've been listening to the latest instalment of Love Bites, Book 2 in the Bloodsuckers blog trilogy. Written by Ella Stone, narrated by Hannah Lynn, and produced by Papercat Publishing.